Do you vote for liberal or Democrat candidates who are okay with that?
No, I would. Well,
so you don't
first
vote
of all,
liberal?
Well, first of all, like voting is secret. So, like, you know, it's my prerogative what I'm going to be voting, and it depends on what their stance. And
okay,
that's
for the
where
sake
I base
of the show, I'm not going.
What's good, family? Welcome back to the channel where we break down the conversations everybody else is too nervous to touch. Today's one is a slow burn that turns into something real. A panel of Christian women, conservative and liberal, sat down on a show called The Bridge to talk faith, family, and the sanctity of life. And it stayed friendly right up until one woman, Angelina, the president of a young Republican federation, started asking questions nobody on the other side wanted to answer out loud. What begins as polite agreement slowly tightens into one of the cleanest corners I've seen in a debate like this, and the moment someone finally admits there's no distinguish left to stand on, the whole room shifts. Do yourself a favor and stick around till the very end on this one, because the final admission completely recolors everything said before it. You'll want to hear how it lands. And while you're here, drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're tuning in from. I genuinely love seeing how far this little community reaches. All right, let's get into it.
Okay. Oh, we all agree on that.
Wow. We got another bridge going on here.
Good. I'm so happy about that.
Yeah.
Would you like to speak to that?
Yes. Okay. So I really think the biggest difference between Christian conservatives and liberals is the sanctity of life. Like, liberals champion killing millions of babies a year. There's millions of Americans who are not born because liberals are championing that side all the time. It is absolutely horrible. It's completely unbiblical. And that is where I think that there is absolutely no such thing as a liberal Christian. You cannot champion abortion of millions of babies a year and call yourself a Christian.
No, I will never do that. That's when I draw the line. A life is a life, and it starts the moment of conception. You can never speak on that. It's murder. It literally is murder. And I do believe that even though I'm liberal in some aspects, I do draw the line on certain things, and that's something that is not negotiable.
But do you vote for liberal or Democrat candidates who are okay with that?
No, I would. Well,
so you don't vote liberal?
Well, first of all, like, voting is secret. So, like, you know, it's my prerogative what I'm going to be voting, and it depends on what their stance. And
okay,
that's
for the sake of the show, I'm not going to ask you who you voted for, but do you support liberal Democrat candidates who also support abortion?
There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of nuances.
No, there's not. There is no nuances in murdering people. There's nothing new about that.
I think that this question, it might be making you guys uncomfortable because it's like, well, if I vote Democrat, obviously they're going to have a more progressive stance on abortion, and it kind of does feel convicting as a Christian. Out of compassion and understanding, I understand that if abortion isn't your triumphantly like overturned, like, I'm definitely not voting for somebody who supports abortion. I get that. That's why a lot of, like, we would say, like, there's no such thing as a liberal Christian. So I understand.
Right, but can they say that though?
I don't think that they're going to say that, because as a Christian, that feels very convicting.
Well, you're right.
So you don't want to be honest. Okay.
Well,
so
that will go against their Christianity.
You don't want to say because you know that it's wrong.
I just don't want to say. I also believe that there are nuances.
Yeah, what would be considered life?
Yeah, where do you believe life begins? I think that's what you're...
Yeah.
Human life?
Yes.
Oh, that's heavy, but I biblically it says when they take their first breath. I don't believe that. As having had 3 children, I believe that life started when their little heartbeats started, and that they could, you know, that there was some form of human, not just a mass of cells, but some form of human that could then be born to be a legitimate human, a viable human.
A legitimate human?
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry.
I meant
that
viable.
Makes me laugh.
I meant viable human.
I think we have a hard time is when you say you're drawing these lines of, well, when it takes its first breath or when the heart is beating, that becomes such a slippery slope for us, because I think heartbeats start around 6 weeks, am I right? And
it
it can
does.
vary within there. And what about a heartbeat is so important to you that is when it actually becomes a human? A 5-week, 6-day-old baby versus a 6-week
Well, it's
baby.
not a baby, it's an embryo,
Okay.
and then it's a fetus.
But when you're talking to
and
your
then it's a
baby in your womb, you're
That's
saying
my baby.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're speaking in those
Yeah.
terms. So that's where I would have a hard time is how is that differentiation made? Because I believe it's at conception. I believe that's the only point where you can actually make a distinction between whether it is human life or not. Everything else is just objective. It's whatever makes you feel good.
You want to know the exact moment someone gets cornered with nowhere left to run? Watch what happens the second Angelina turns one simple question into a wall. She lays it out plainly. Angelina said this, "There is absolutely no such thing as a liberal Christian. And here's why that line lands so hard. She is not attacking a person. She is pointing at a contradiction. You cannot say the sanctity of unborn life is non-negotiable for you and then hand your support to the very people building their entire platform around the opposite. That is the tension she just exposed." Then she goes for the cleanest question of the whole conversation. Angelina asked her directly, "But do you vote for liberal or Democrat candidates who are okay with that?" Simple. And this is the part that tells you everything. Instead of answering, the other woman reaches for the escape hatch. She said this, "Voting is secret. It's my prerogative what I'm going to be voting." You have to understand what just happened. When someone has a clean answer, they give it. When someone is hiding from their own position, they hide behind privacy. The privacy card is not an argument. It is a curtain. And what makes this so satisfying is that she already called this the one line she would never cross. So if it's truly non-negotiable, the vote should be the easiest question on earth. The fact that it suddenly became complicated, suddenly became private, suddenly needed nuance, tells you the conviction was never as solid as the words pretended. Angelina then nails it. "I believe it's at conception. Everything else is just objective. It's whatever makes you feel good." And she's right. Once you move the starting line off conception, you're not following a principle anymore. You're following a feeling.
I also believe that it is very important. I was in education for 40 years, so, and in some interesting neighborhoods. So I saw poverty, and I saw children that were not well taken care of, and I saw the system not feeding, clothing, all sorts of things. As an educator, that was extremely sad to me, because I know that they could have done better in a different situation.
Got it. So is your
So-
solution, I'm just not understanding where you're drawing the
I'm
similarity.
going to get there in a second.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that if that child that is miserable is going to be miserable, and a system is not going to take care of them after they're born, then why would the system want to take care of them before they're born?
Could I?
Called eugenics, and if you want to continue.
Yeah, I don't think that just because someone's going to have a hard life, it justifies killing them. I know
Well,
from
I
in my
agree.
community, pregnancy centers are not as popular. Planned Parenthoods are more, if you look at the history of Planned Parenthood, it's to exterminate minority babies. People who are most affected are Black and brown babies. And so I just think that, just because we're statistically more likely to have a harder life doesn't mean that we should take the opportunity away from them to live. And I think that, pregnancy centers actually outnumber Planned Parenthoods 14-1. I worked at one for a little while. I'm providing prenatal care, paying for the mother's rent. Christians are actually the demographic that fund these more than any other demographic. And so I think that there are resources. I definitely agree we should have more resources, 100%. But I just don't think it means that we need to unalive babies. Well, do you think it's okay to murder someone who's 5 years old or 10 years old? Like, just because I have a choice to do something doesn't mean it's morally acceptable. And so within freedom, we also can't hurt people. And so our freedom's in there.
I think too, back to that, and kind of back to what you're saying, just to go back to scripture, because we're all Christian and that should be our foundation. It says that I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. So for us in this physical reality, we might say that life happens at conception, but in God's mind, he knew each and every one of us before he laid the foundations of the earth.
So birth control's out?
So I didn't say that, but
Well, I knew you before.
I formed you. So yeah, some people would argue that birth control shouldn't be. If we all Eric, if we're going to say that life begins at conception, right? You can't have an abortion before getting past that stage of conception, right? Whether you want to say zygote, fetus, embryo, clash of cells, cells are also an indication of life as well, if we're talking scientifically.
Now, this is where the conversation stopped being polite and started being revealing. The educator builds this whole emotional setup about poverty and struggling kids, and then drops the part that should stop everyone cold. She said this: if that child is going to be miserable, and a system is not going to take care of them after they're born, then why would the system want to take care of them before they're born? Sit with that for a second. The argument is basically that a hard life is a reason to make sure there's no life at all, and Angelina does not flinch. She gives it the one word it deserves. Angelina said this: I think that's called eugenics. That is not an insult. That is a history lesson. Because here's what people don't realize. The idea that some lives are not worth bringing into the world because they might be poor, or struggling, or inconvenient is not new, and it is not progressive. In the early 20th century, that exact logic powered the eugenics movement, and respected institutions in multiple countries used it to justify deciding which people deserve to exist. That thinking did not age well. Everyone looking back at it now sees it for exactly what it was. So when a modern argument quietly arrives at the same destination, it earns the same name. Then Angelina brings in the part the other side never wants to hear: the actual founding history of the largest provider of these procedures, and how it was openly aimed at minority communities. And she follows it with the point that has no clean comeback. Being statistically more likely to have a harder life does not make someone less deserving of a chance to live. Finally, she grounds it right where every Christian in that room should already be standing. Angelina said this: I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. For people who claim the same book, that's not a talking point. That's the whole foundation.
But if you want to say like about the choice, what distinguishes child sacrifice out external to the womb and in the womb? So I get that liberals may say like, okay, we want people to have a choice, and if that's their reasoning, that'd be their reasoning. But there would be logically between the same thought process, what's to distinguish between life inside the womb when it's happening inside your body, and your body is a vessel of life. We have heartbeats. The baby lives through your living, right? If you were dead, the baby probably, some cases, won't be able to live, right? Unless they're keeping you alive on life support. But what distinguishes child sacrifice external to the womb than child sacrifice in the womb? And oftentimes when you say that, like, most people will get abortions and say, I wasn't ready, or I didn't have the resources. That's the same reasons why people sacrifice their children to gods, for money, for X, Y, and Z. So it's like, what's the distinguishing factor to life in the womb and life outside the womb?
I wouldn't say there's no distinguish. But back to the nuance point, what if there is a scenario where, say if someone has been sexually assaulted and then they end up having to conceive, would that be a scenario where you would feel like, okay, maybe it's kind of justified to get rid of it?
I think that I understand that sentiment a lot, but majority of abortions aren't actually because of sexual assault statistically, but even those that are, and this is going off a piece of media I consumed, somebody was born out of rape, and they said, am I not allowed to experience life because of somebody else's mistake, somebody else's sin? And I think that is a hard cross to carry, to, give life to a baby that you conceived through rape. That's horrible. But does that make the life and the person that would come through accountable for the sin of somebody else? And I think that's the bigger question. And it's a moral conflict. That's why we're having this discussion now. But I don't think that the child born out of rape should pay for the rapist's crime.
And here is the moment the entire disagreement collapses into one honest sentence. Angelina keeps pressing on the simple logic, asking what's the distinguishing factor to life in the womb and life outside the womb. And the other woman, to her credit for being honest, finally admits it. She said this: I wouldn't say there's no distinguish. Stop. Rewind that in your head. That is the whole ball game. Because the entire case for treating one as protected and the other as optional rests on there being some magic difference between the two. And when she was asked to name that difference, she couldn't. There isn't one. She said there isn't one. This is the part that gets me every single time. Two people sat across from each other claiming the same faith, the same book, the same God, and one of them was willing to follow the logic all the way to the uncomfortable end, while the other kept reaching for words like nuance and prerogative whenever the question got too direct. And I want to be fair, because the women on the other side were thoughtful, sincere, and they clearly cared. This was not a shouting match. That's actually what makes it so powerful. Nobody got bullied into agreement. The position just could not hold itself up under a few plain questions. And that's the lesson I want you to walk away with. Strong convictions don't need a privacy curtain. They don't need to hide behind "it depends." They don't crumble the second someone asks you to be specific. When your belief is built on a real principle, you can say it out loud, you can name exactly where you draw the line, and you can defend it even when the room gets tense. When it's built on a feeling, you start dodging, you start softening, you start hoping the next question never comes. That difference is the entire conversation. And you just watched it play out in real time, with everyone smiling, on a show literally called The Bridge. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.